He left her for fame, but years later she returned as a billionaire, and he begged for a second chance with their son. The restaurant's warm golden lights couldn't soften the words that would destroy everything Lyric believed in. Sebastian sat across from her, his fingers drumming against the white tablecloth, the same fingers that had traced promises on her skin just hours before. She watched him struggle to meet her eyes, and in that moment, before he even spoke, she knew their 5-year love story was ending. They'd come to Marcello's because Sebastian had insisted on taking her somewhere nice, somewhere neutral. "We need to talk," he'd said that morning, his voice carrying a weight that made her stomach drop. "Somewhere we can have privacy." Their apartment, the home they'd built together, suddenly felt too intimate for whatever conversation he'd been avoiding for weeks. "I've accepted the position in Singapore," he said, each word dropping like stones into still water. "The contract starts in 3 weeks. Lyric's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. They had talked about Singapore 2 months ago, talked and decided together that their life, their future, was here in Chicago. The marketing firm she'd worked so hard to build from nothing, the apartment they'd just signed a 2-year lease on, the engagement everyone expected would come before summer. All of it hung suspended in this moment, waiting to shatter. "You already accepted it?" Her voice came out steady, controlled, a skill learned from years of client presentations when everything was falling apart behind polished conference room doors. "Without discussing it with me first." Sebastian finally looked up, and she saw it there in his eyes. Not guilt, not regret, but relief. He was relieved to finally tell her what he'd been hiding. "Lyric, this is my dream job, creative director at Morrison International. You know what this means for my career." She did know, just as he knew what staying meant for hers. Their story hadn't begun with grand gestures or lightning strikes of attraction. It started quietly on a rainy Thursday evening at a coffee shop near the university where they both worked. She is a marketing consultant for the business school. He is a graphic designer for campus publications. Sebastian had been sitting alone at a corner table, sketching logos on his tablet, completely absorbed in his work. Lyric had nowhere else to sit with her laptop and client files, the place packed with students escaping the downpour. "Mind if I share your table?" she'd asked, balancing her coffee and overstuffed bag. He'd looked up, startled, then smiled. Not the practiced charm she'd later learn he could deploy at will, but something genuine and slightly awkward. "Only if you don't mind me occasionally talking to myself about font choices." That made her laugh, the first real laugh she'd had in weeks after a particularly brutal client loss. She sat down, and for 2 hours they worked in comfortable silence, broken only by his occasional muttered debates about serif versus sans serif. When she finally packed up to leave, he asked if she'd be there tomorrow. "Probably," she said. "Big presentation Friday, and my apartment's too full of distractions." "Then I'll bring better coffee," he replied. "The stuff here tastes like disappointment." He did bring better coffee, a thermos of perfectly brewed Colombian roast that he'd gotten up early to make. That second evening, they talked between work tasks. She learned he'd moved to Chicago from a small town in Michigan, carrying dreams bigger than his portfolio. He discovered she'd grown up right here in the city, watching her parents' small business fail, and vowing to build something that would last. Within a month, those coffee shop work sessions turned into dinners. Within 3 months, she had a drawer at his apartment. By the end of that first year, they were living together in a cramped studio in Lincoln Park, their computers set up on opposite ends of the same desk, building their careers side by side. They were partners in every sense that mattered. When Lyric lost her biggest client to a competitor's lowball offer, Sebastian stayed up all night helping her redesign her portfolio website, making her capabilities shine in ways her words alone couldn't capture. When his employer passed him over for a promotion he'd earned twice over, Lyric practiced interview questions with him, until he landed a better position at a boutique design firm. Their Sunday mornings became sacred. No work, no phones until noon. Just the two of them, strong coffee and the Chicago Tribune spread across their bed while they debated everything from politics to whether deep dish pizza was actually pizza. He said no. She said he had no soul, and they'd argue about it with the kind of affection that made the debate itself more important than winning. They discovered the city together, finding hidden bookstores in Wicker Park, the best dim sum in Chinatown, the perfect spot in Millennium Park where you could watch the sunrise and paint the buildings gold. On their 3rd anniversary, Sebastian had taken her back to that original coffee shop, now under new management but still smelling of burnt espresso and old books. "We're building something," Lyric would say when friends asked about marriage plans. "Everything else will come when it's ready." Sebastian would squeeze her hand and add, "We're not in a rush. We know where we're going." Except apparently they hadn't known at all. The Singapore opportunity first appeared like dozens of others, a recruiter's LinkedIn message that Sebastian almost deleted. But something about it caught his attention. Morrison International, looking for someone to head their new Southeast Asian creative division. The salary was triple what he made now. The prestige was undeniable. The catch was living halfway around the world. "It's interesting," he'd said that night 2 months ago, showing her the job posting on his phone while they cooked dinner together. "But obviously not realistic." "Why not?" Lyric had asked, stirring pasta sauce while reading over his shoulder. "I mean, if it's something you want to explore." He'd kissed her temple, taking the spoon from her hand. "Because my life is here, you're here, your business is here. That matters more than any job." They talked about it seriously for exactly 1 evening. Lyric had even pulled up her client list, trying to figure out if she could manage them remotely. But the numbers didn't work. Her business thrived on face-to-face relationships, local network connections she'd spent 4 years cultivating. Starting over in Singapore would mean abandoning everything she'd built. "I could probably maintain maybe 30% of my current clients remotely," she'd said, laptop open to spreadsheets that told a clear story. "But that's not enough to sustain the business. I'd basically be starting from scratch." "Then that's our answer," Sebastian had said simply, closing her laptop. "No job is worth asking you to give up what you've worked for." They'd agreed. Or she thought they had. Now, sitting in this restaurant where they'd celebrated her first 6-figure contract just last month, Lyric understood that agreement had only existed in her mind. While she'd been planning their future in Chicago, he'd been planning his escape to Singapore. "When did you interview?" she asked, her voice still remarkably calm. The other diners around them continued their meals, unaware that a 5-year relationship was quietly dying 3 tables over. "Last month. They flew me out for a weekend." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You were at that conference in Denver, the conference where she'd spoken on a panel about building sustainable small businesses, where she'd mentioned her partner Sebastian at least 3 times, talking about how crucial support systems were for entrepreneurs. The bitter irony of it made her stomach turn. So while I was telling a room full of people about partnership and mutual support, you were secretly interviewing for a job on the other side of the world. Lyric, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." That broke through her calm. "Harder than it needs to be? You made a life-changing decision without me. You lied to me for a month. You let me sign a 2-year lease, knowing you were leaving. How exactly should I be making this easier for you?" "I didn't lie," he protested. I needed to know if I'd even get the offer before bringing it up. And when you got it, how long have you been sitting on this acceptance?" His silence was answer enough. A week, at least, maybe 2. All those nights he'd held her, all those morning kisses, all those casual discussions about summer vacation plans, all of it had been a performance. "I know I handled this wrong," Sebastian continued, reaching for her hand across the table. She pulled it back, placing both hands in her lap. But Lyric, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Creative director at 31. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how rare what we have is? She countered. Or had, I suppose I should say. We could go long distance. You could visit. Maybe eventually you could expand there. Stop. The word came out sharp enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. Lyric lowered her voice. Don't insult me by pretending you actually thought this through for us. You thought it through for you. You made your choice. The waiter approached, probably to take their order, but something in Lyric's expression made him pivot smoothly away. She was grateful. The last thing she needed was to pretend to choose between the salmon and the chicken while her relationship imploded. I love you, Sebastian said, and for once she believed he meant it. But I can't pass this up. I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't take this chance. Lyric nodded slowly, understanding flooding through her with terrible clarity. And if you take it, I'll regret staying with someone who could make this kind of decision without me. She stood, pulling on her coat with deliberate movements. No tears, not yet. Those would come later, in the privacy of what would soon be only her apartment. Right now she would leave with her dignity intact. Lyric, wait, let's talk about this. We just did. She looked down at him one last time, memorizing his face, not with love, but as a reminder of how wrong she could be about someone. I'll be at my sister's tonight. Please have your things moved out by the time I get back tomorrow evening. Walking out of that restaurant was simultaneously the hardest and easiest thing she'd ever done. Hard because she was leaving behind 5 years of shared dreams, inside jokes, and planned tomorrows. Easy because staying would have meant accepting that her dreams, her work, her life mattered less than his. The cold Chicago wind hit her face as she pushed through the door onto the street. It was sharp, clarifying, like the moment itself. Tomorrow she will grieve. Tonight she would simply walk, letting the city that had always been her home remind her that she'd been whole before Sebastian, and she would be whole after him. Behind her, through the restaurant window, Sebastian sat alone at their table, perhaps finally understanding that some choices, once made, can never be undone. Thank you all so much for helping me get to 1,000 subscribers. This story of betrayal and resilience is just beginning. If it resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that choosing yourself is never the wrong decision. The morning Sebastian left for Singapore, Lyric watched from her sister's apartment window as his rental car pulled away from their building. He'd texted her that he'd be gone by noon, a courtesy she hadn't asked for but somehow made everything worse. From 3 floors up and across the street, she could see him loading the last of his boxes, his computer equipment, his design books, the expensive coffee maker he'd bought them last Christmas. Natasha stood behind her, steady and quiet, a cup of tea cooling in her hands meant for Lyric, who couldn't stomach anything. You don't have to watch this, her sister said softly. Yes, I do, Lyric replied, her forehead pressed against the cold glass. I need to see him actually leave. Otherwise, part of me will keep waiting for him to come back. Sebastian emerged one final time, carrying the small succulent garden they'd cultivated together on the fire escape. He stood there for a moment, looking up at their apartment windows, no, her apartment windows now, then placed the plants carefully by the building's entrance. For someone else to take, she supposed. Even their shared growing things weren't worth preserving. When the car finally disappeared around the corner, Lyric's knees gave out. 5 years of suppressed tears came flooding out on Natasha's hardwood floor, her body shaking with the force of everything she'd held back. Her sister sank down beside her, pulling her close, not saying anything about it being okay or that she was better off without him. Natasha simply held her while she grieved not just Sebastian, but the future she'd thought was certain. I was so stupid, Lyric gasped between sobs. I thought we were building something together. You were, Natasha said firmly, He just decided to build something else instead. That's on him, not you. For 3 days, Lyric didn't leave Natasha's apartment. She called her clients, rescheduled meetings, and claimed a stomach virus. On the 4th day, she forced herself to go home. The apartment felt wrong, too quiet, too empty, like a stage after the actors had gone. Sebastian had been thorough. No forgotten socks under the bed, no stray sketches on the desk, no trace of his cologne in the bathroom. Only the indent on his side of the mattress proved he'd ever been there at all. But Lyric was nothing if not resilient. She'd watched her parents lose everything and rebuild. She'd started her business with $200 and determination. She could survive this too. She threw herself into work with frightening intensity. 18-hour days became normal. She pursued new clients aggressively, expanded her services, took on projects she would have previously turned down. If Sebastian could choose career over love, then she would make her career spectacular enough to justify being chosen over. 6 weeks after he left, she discovered she was pregnant. The 2 pink lines on the test didn't make sense at first. She'd been on birth control, religious about it, but antibiotics from a sinus infection the month before Sebastian left. Her doctor had warned her, she remembered now, about reduced effectiveness. They'd been careful, except for that one morning when they weren't, when Sebastian had pulled her back into bed, both of them late for meetings but not caring. Lyric sat on her bathroom floor, holding 3 more tests, all positive, and laughed. It was a hollow, disbelieving sound. The timing was so catastrophically bad it felt like the universe's cruel joke. She was barely keeping her business afloat while working constantly. Her emergency fund had been depleted by taking over the full rent, and Sebastian was literally on the other side of the world, probably already forgetting the life they'd planned. She didn't tell him. Not at first. She spent 2 weeks researching her options, making spreadsheets and running numbers. Could she do this alone? Should she? The logical answer was probably no. The emotional answer, the one that came when she placed her hand on her still flat stomach, was absolutely yes. When she finally called Sebastian, it was 2 a.m. in Chicago, 3 p.m. in Singapore. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice professional, until he realized who it was. "Lyric, is everything okay? I'm pregnant." The silence stretched across continents. She could hear office noise in his background, keyboards clicking, distant conversation. His new life continued while hers imploded again. "How? When?" "About 8 weeks. That weekend before you told me about Singapore." She kept her voice clinical, informational. "I'm keeping it. I'm not asking you for anything. I just thought you should know." "Lyric, Jesus. I'll come back. We can figure this out." "No." The word came out firm, decisive. "You made your choice, Sebastian. I'm making mine. I'll send you paperwork for signing away parental rights if that's what you want. Or we can work out some kind of support arrangement. Your call. This is crazy. We should talk about this properly. We should have talked about Singapore properly too. But that ship has sailed, hasn't it?" She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone. The next morning she found 14 missed calls and a long email full of confusion, accusations, and half-hearted offers to work something out. She responded with one line, "Let me know what you decide about the paperwork." 2 weeks later, the first support payment arrived in her bank account, substantial, more than legally required, sent with no note or explanation. Sebastian had made his choice, financial responsibility without personal involvement. Lyric deposited the money into a separate account labeled emergency only. She would provide for this child herself, even if it killed her. Natasha was the first person she told in person, showing up at her sister's door with prenatal vitamins and tears. "Oh, honey," Natasha said, pulling her inside. "We're going to figure this out." "I can't afford a baby," Lyric admitted, the reality crushing. "The business needs every penny reinvested. I don't have maternity leave. I don't have Sebastian. I don't have anything figured out. You have me, Natasha said simply. You have Mom and Dad. You have that terrifying determination that built a business from nothing. This baby has no idea how lucky they are. The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that made her fall asleep during client calls, swelling that made her feet look like balloons. She hid it from clients as long as possible, wearing blazers that wouldn't button, conducting meetings via video call from the chest up only. When she finally had to tell them, she was 7 months along and could barely fit behind her desk. Some clients were supportive. Others immediately started asking about her backup plans, her coverage during maternity leave, whether she could still handle their accounts. She lost 2 major contracts to competitors who whispered about reliability and focus. She smiled through it all, then cried in her car afterward, her belly pressed against the steering wheel. The monthly payments from Sebastian continued arriving like clockwork, never accompanied by calls, never with requests for updates or ultrasound photos. Just money, transferred on the 1st of every month, the only evidence that he remembered she existed at all. The night she went into labor, Chicago was experiencing the worst storm in 5 years. Rain pounded against windows like fists, and the power had been flickering all evening. She was alone, working on a presentation due the next morning, when the first real contraction hit, not the practice ones she'd been having for weeks, but something that made her grab the edge of her desk and forget to breathe. She called Natasha, who lived 20 minutes away on a good day. Tonight, with flooding and downed trees, it would take at least an hour. "I'm coming," Natasha shouted over the storm. "Call an ambulance." But the 911 dispatcher informed her there was a 45-minute wait minimum. Multi-car accidents, flooding emergencies, the whole city in chaos. Lyric agreed to wait, then immediately regretted it as another contraction rolled through her. She made it to her bedroom, hospital bag in hand, trying to remember everything from the birthing classes she'd taken alone, surrounded by couples holding hands. Breathe through the pain. Count between contractions. Stay calm. Calm went out the window when her water broke, flooding her bedroom floor with alarming intensity. The contractions came faster, harder, barely 2 minutes apart. This wasn't how first babies were supposed to come. They were supposed to take hours, days even. But her son, apparently, had inherited her refusal to follow conventional timelines. By the time Natasha burst through the door, soaking wet and wild-eyed, Lyric was on her bathroom floor, knowing with terrifying certainty that this baby was coming now. "The ambulance is still 15 minutes out," Natasha said, dropping to her knees beside her. "We're going to be okay. Women have been doing this forever." "Not alone in storms without medical help," Lyric gasped, then screamed as the urge to push became overwhelming. What followed was the longest and shortest hour of her life. Natasha on the phone with a 911 operator, following instructions with shaking hands, the lights flickering but mercifully stayed on, the storm howling outside like the world was ending. While inside, a new life was beginning. Dorian arrived at 11:47 p.m., screaming and perfect, and absolutely the most beautiful thing Lyric had ever seen. Natasha wrapped him in clean towels, placing him on Lyric's chest where he immediately stopped crying, looking up at her with dark eyes that would later remind her painfully of Sebastian, a genetic reminder she hadn't anticipated. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later, finding them both stable but exhausted. At the hospital, doctors marveled that everything had gone so smoothly given the circumstances. "You're tougher than you look," one nurse said, checking Dorian's vitals for the 3rd time. Lyric looked down at her son, this tiny person who'd arrived in chaos but now slept peacefully against her chest. "We both are," she whispered. Sebastian called the next day, having received an automated notification from the bank about an increased support payment he'd set up to trigger upon the birth. "Is it true? You had the baby. His name is Dorian," she said, too tired for anger. £7, 2 ounces. Born during the storm. Would you send a picture? She did. One photo of Dorian sleeping, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. Sebastian responded immediately. He's perfect. I'm so sorry, Lyric. For everything. I know, she replied, because what else was there to say? Sorry it didn't change anything. Sorry didn't help with 3 a.m. feedings or finding affordable childcare or the way her body felt foreign and broken. That first year nearly destroyed her. Dorian was colicky, crying for hours no matter what she tried. She worked while he napped, typing one-handed while breastfeeding, taking client calls with him strapped to her chest in a carrier. Her business suffered. Her body suffered. Her mental health frayed until she found herself crying as hard as Dorian some nights, both of them exhausted and miserable. But they survived. Day by day, feeding by feeding, milestone by milestone. Dorian's first smile at 6 weeks made every sleepless night worth it. His first laugh at 4 months sounded like redemption. When he started sleeping through the night at 8 months, Lyric actually cried from relief and got her first full 8 hours in almost a year. "We're going to be okay," she would whisper to him during those endless early morning hours, walking circles around the apartment to soothe him. "I promise you, baby. I'll give you everything. Everything I have, everything I am. You'll never doubt you were chosen, wanted, loved." By Dorian's first birthday, they'd found their rhythm. Lyric had learned to work differently, more efficiently. She'd found reliable childcare through a neighbor who watched 3 other babies. She'd even started rebuilding her client base, selling herself not despite being a single mother, but because of it. She was proof of ultimate multitasking, dedication, and grace under pressure. Sebastian sent a birthday gift, an expensive developmental toy set with a card that said simply, "Thinking of you both." Lyric let Dorian play with the toys but threw the card away. Some doors, once closed, needed to stay that way. The idea came to Lyric at 2:37 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly the way most breakthroughs come to exhausted single mothers, born from desperation rather than inspiration. Dorian was 18 months old, finally sleeping through most nights, giving Lyric precious hours to work. She'd been reviewing a client's urban development proposal, something generic about mixed-use residential spaces, when her mind wandered to her own struggles. Finding affordable housing near good schools, childcare that didn't cost more than rent, community spaces where working parents could actually connect instead of just surviving in isolation. She opened a new document and started typing, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts could fully form. What if housing developments were designed specifically for single parents and low-income families, but without the stigma of traditional subsidized housing? What if the buildings themselves created community, shared childcare spaces, co-working areas, skill-sharing programs? What if architecture could solve social problems instead of just providing shelter? By sunrise, she had 20 pages of rough concepts. By the end of the week, she'd sketched preliminary designs on every scrap of paper in her apartment. Dorian's artwork got mixed in with her floor plans. Her grocery lists had elevation drawings on the back. "This is either brilliant or I've completely lost my mind," she told Natasha over coffee while Dorian played at their feet. Natasha studied the sketches spread across her kitchen table. "These are incredible lyrics. But you're a marketing consultant, not an architect." "I know," Lyric admitted, the familiar weight of impossibility settling on her shoulders. "But I can't stop thinking about it. What if this could actually work? What if I could build something that helps people like me?" "Then you need to talk to actual architects," Natasha said practically. "Turn this vision into something real." For the next 6 months, Lyric lived 2 lives. During the day, she was the professional marketing consultant, managing client accounts and keeping her business viable. At night, after Dorian fell asleep, she became something else entirely, a self-taught architect, urban planner, and social reformer, all rolled into one sleep-deprived package. She reached out to former university contacts, begging for 20-minute phone calls that stretched into 2-hour consultations. An architect friend from her consulting days agreed to review her designs in exchange for marketing help with his firm. A structural engineer she'd worked with on a previous project donated weekend hours, fascinated by her concept. A social worker she met at Dorian's daycare contributed research on community housing models. The designs evolved. Her initial sketches transformed into proper architectural renderings, buildings that were beautiful but functional, innovative but affordable. She incorporated green spaces on every floor, shared kitchens that could reduce individual living costs, flexible units that could expand or contract based on family needs. Her apartment became mission control, one wall covered entirely in butcher paper, showing her master plan for an entire community. Her laptop perpetually open to CAD software tutorials she watched on mute while Dorian slept. Coffee cups forming rings on sketches of community gardens and cooperative childcare centers. "Mama work?" Dorian would ask, finding her at the kitchen table at midnight, surrounded by papers and cold dinner she'd forgotten to eat. "Mama's building something special," she'd tell him, pulling him into her lap for a quick cuddle before carrying him back to bed. "Something that will help lots of kids like you." The exhaustion was crushing. She gained weight from stress eating, then lost it from forgetting to eat at all. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under her eyes. Her business suffered as she diverted energy to this project that might never materialize. But she couldn't stop. This concept felt bigger than her, more important than anything she'd done before. It wasn't just about architecture anymore. Lyric was designing a complete ecosystem, one where economic barriers didn't prevent access to quality childcare, where isolation didn't compound the struggles of single parenthood, where housing provided not just shelter but opportunity. Every element served a purpose. Community kitchens reduced food costs while building relationships. Co-working spaces eliminated commute time while creating professional networks. On-site childcare made employment sustainable for parents who couldn't afford market-rate daycare. She tested her concepts with other single mothers at Dorian's daycare, refining ideas based on their real-world needs. What amenities would actually help? What design elements felt patronizing? How could buildings communicate dignity rather than charity? "Make it look like somewhere we'd choose to live," one mother told her bluntly. "Not somewhere we ended up because we had no options." That feedback became Lyric's North Star, design that elevated rather than stigmatized, that acknowledged struggle without defining residents by it. The Global Innovation in Urban Housing Competition announcement appeared in her inbox on a Thursday morning in March. Entry fee, $50. Submission deadline, 3 weeks away. Grand prize, $100,000, and mentorship from leading international architects. Lyric stared at her bank balance. After rent, childcare, groceries, and business expenses, she had $127 to last until her next client payment came through. $50 represented a week of dinners, or Dorian's spring clothes he desperately needed, or the car repair she'd been putting off. She paid the entry fee anyway. Those 3 weeks blurred into a fever dream of work. She called in every favor, pushed every boundary. Her architect friend pulled 2 all-nighters, helping her finalize technical drawings. She maxed out her printer cartridges producing presentation materials. She wrote and rewrote her proposal 17 times, each version trying to capture not just what she was building, but why it mattered. The concept she submitted was called Foundation Communities, residential developments designed to provide not just housing, but comprehensive support systems for single parents and low-income families. Each building would include subsidized childcare centers on the ground floor, co-working spaces for remote workers or small business owners, community kitchens to reduce food costs, skill-sharing programs where residents could trade services, and educational resources. But the revolutionary part was the financial model. By incorporating commercial rental spaces along the street-facing sides, cafes, shops, small offices, the developments would generate ongoing revenue. This income would subsidize rent for qualifying families while keeping the buildings economically sustainable. No government funding required. No charitable model that could disappear with political wins. Just smart design creates social good. "You're proposing to solve poverty through architecture," her architect friends said, reviewing the final submission at 3 a.m. on deadline day. "I'm proposing to give people what I needed when Dorian was born," Lyric corrected. "Community, opportunity, a foundation to build from." She submitted the entry at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline. The timestamp felt significant, the exact moment Dorian had been born, as though he'd arrived to mark the beginning of everything she was becoming. Then she closed her laptop, checked on sleeping Dorian, and cried from exhaustion and fear and hope all tangled together. 4 months passed with no word. Lyric assumed her submission had disappeared into the void with thousands of others. She refocused on her consulting business, took on new clients, and tried to rebuild her financial stability. The sketches stayed on her wall, but she stopped obsessing over them. It had been a beautiful dream, nothing more. The call came on a Tuesday in July. Dorian was at daycare, and Lyric was finishing a client presentation when her phone rang with an international number. "Ms. Morrison?" "This is Anders Lindholm calling from the Global Innovation in Urban Housing Competition Committee in Stockholm." Her heart stopped. "Yes, this is Lyric Morrison. I'm delighted to inform you that your foundation community's proposal has been selected as one of 3 finalists for our grand prize. We'd like to fly you to Stockholm next month for the final presentation round." The room tilted. She sat down hard in her desk chair, phone pressed to her ear so tightly it hurt. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Anders laughed warmly. "You're a finalist, Ms. Morrison. Your concept is extraordinary. The judges were unanimous. We've never seen anything quite like this integration of social support and sustainable architecture. You should be very proud." After he explained the next steps, the flight they'd arrange, the hotel they'd book, the 20-minute presentation she'd need to prepare, Lyric hung up and sat in stunned silence. Then she called Natasha and sobbed so hard her sister thought something terrible had happened. "I'm a finalist," she kept repeating. "Natasha, I might actually win this." "You're going to win this," Natasha said fiercely, "because nobody else has lived what you're proposing to fix. The month before Stockholm was madness." Lyric refined her presentation obsessively, practiced her pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep, prepared for every possible question. She found care for Dorian, her parents taking a week off work to stay with him, an arrangement that cost her pride but was necessary. The hardest part was the night before her flight, putting Dorian to bed knowing she'd be gone when he woke up. "Mama has to go away for a few days," she explained, holding him close. "Grandma and Grandpa will be here. I'll call you every day." "Where does Mama go?" "Somewhere very far away to talk about the special project. Remember how Mama's building something to help people? I have to tell some important people about it." "Mama come back?" "Always, baby. I will always come back to you." Stockholm was magnificent and terrifying. The presentation hall held 200 international housing experts, developers and government officials. Lyric stood backstage in a suit she'd bought specifically for this moment, professional armor to hide the single mother who still sometimes cried from exhaustion. When her turn came, she walked onto that stage and channeled every ounce of desperation, determination, and hope she'd felt over the past 2 years. She didn't just present foundation communities, she told her story. The pregnancy alone, the birth during the storm, the impossible choices between work and childcare, the isolation of single parenthood in a world designed for two-parent households. "I'm not an architect," she admitted to the audience. "I'm a marketing consultant who got pregnant and abandoned, who built this concept because I needed it to exist." Every element of foundation communities comes from lived experience, from knowing exactly what it feels like to choose between paying rent and affording childcare, between professional opportunity and being present for your child, between asking for help and maintaining dignity. She showed them the numbers, the sustainability models, the architectural innovations. But more than that, she showed them the human cost of designing cities without considering how real families actually live. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. 2 judges had tears in their eyes. Anders Lindholm approached her immediately after, hand extended. "Ms. Morrison, I believe you've just changed the future of urban housing policy." 3 days later, standing in that same hall, Lyric accepted the grand prize, $100,000, mentorship from the world's leading architects, and validation that her desperate late-night concept could actually transform lives. She called Dorian from her hotel room that night, her voice breaking as she tried to explain to a 2-year-old that Mama had won something important. "Mama happy?" he asked. "Mama is very happy, baby. And when Mama gets home, we're going to build something amazing together." While Lyric was preparing for Stockholm, Sebastian was experiencing his own professional triumph 8,000 miles away. Morrison International had just landed the biggest contract in company history, a complete brand redesign for a multinational corporation worth $40 million. Sebastian, as creative director, would lead the team. It was everything he'd left Chicago for, everything he'd sacrificed for. His apartment in Singapore's Marina Bay district had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. His salary allowed luxuries he'd only dreamed about in their cramped Chicago studio. He attended gallery openings, networked with creative directors from around the world, saw his work featured in international design publications. But success tasted like ashes. He looked at Dorian's pictures constantly, the ones Lyric sent monthly, brief updates with no personal messages. Just Dorian at 18 months or first day of daycare. The boy's features were beginning to show clearly now, and Sebastian saw himself reflected there in ways that made his chest ache. He'd offered money, offered more involvement, offered everything except the one thing that mattered, actually being there. Lyric had been gracious but firm in her response. He could be fully in or fully out, but she wouldn't accept half measures. It wasn't fair to Dorian to have a father. Sebastian had chosen out, telling himself it was for the best. What did he know about being a father? He had left when he was 6. He was building a career, traveling constantly, working 80-hour weeks. A child deserved more stability than he could provide. But late at night, alone in his expensive apartment, he questioned everything. His colleague James had photos of his kids on his desk, left early for soccer games, talked about family dinners like they were the highlight of his day. Sebastian had frameless awards and an empty home. "You ever regret not having a family?" he asked James one evening after a particularly grueling day. "I have a family," James said, confused. I have a son, in Chicago. I've never met him." James set down his drink, his expression shifting from casual to serious. "Then what are you doing here?" "Building my career. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Sacrifice for success? Success for what, though? So you can die alone in a fancy apartment surrounded by awards nobody will remember in 10 years? James shook his head. "I'm not judging, Sebastian, but I am telling you, 20 years from now, you won't remember this contract or that promotion. You'll remember whether you were there for your kid." The morning Sebastian received notification that his team had won the multinational contract, his phone buzzed with Lyric's monthly photo. Dorian, at 2 years old, laughing at something off camera, pure joy on his face. The accompanying message was brief as always. Dorian, age 2. Healthy and happy. Sebastian saved the image, then pulled up the email from his CEO congratulating him on the win. Professional triumph on one hand, personal loss on the other. He'd made his choice, now he had to live with it. Have you ever had to choose between love and ambition? Drop a comment about which path you'd take, career opportunities or the people you love. There's no right answer, but your choice reveals what matters most. Let's talk about it in the comments below. Lyric stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown Chicago office, looking out at the skyline she'd known her entire life. Somewhere out there, barely visible from this height, was the cramped apartment where she'd raised Dorian alone during those brutal early years. The distance between that struggling single mother and the woman she'd become felt impossible to measure. Foundation Communities had won the Stockholm competition 6 years ago when Dorian was just 2 years old. The $100,000 prize had funded her first pilot project, a single building in Chicago's South Side that transformed an abandoned warehouse into housing for 23 families. The success of that project attracted investors, then more investors, then a partnership with a major development firm that believed in her vision. Now, at 37, Lyric oversaw 17 foundation communities across 6 cities. Each one followed her original model: mixed-income housing with integrated childcare, community spaces, skill-sharing programs, and commercial rental income that made the whole system sustainable. She'd proven that smart design could address social inequality while remaining profitable, a combination that had made her both wealthy and influential. Her company, Morrison Development Group, employed over 200 people. Her personal net worth had crossed 9 figures last year, though she lived modestly by billionaire standards. The money meant security for Dorian, the ability to expand her mission, and freedom from ever being vulnerable the way she'd been when Sebastian left. "Ms. Morrison, your 3 p.m. is here," her assistant announced through the intercom. Lyric turned from the window, smoothing her tailored suit. Custom-made now, not the department store clearance items she'd worn while stretching every dollar. "Send them in." The meeting was with city officials from Boston, interested in bringing foundation communities to their area. She guided them through presentations, answered questions about sustainability metrics and social impact data, negotiated terms with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. This was her world now. She'd built it from nothing, from late nights and desperation and the fierce determination to give her son a better life. After the Boston delegation left, promising contracts within the month, Lyric allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd done it. Against every odds, despite every obstacle, she'd turned her 2 a.m. desperation into a global movement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Natasha. "Don't forget, Dorian's science fair tonight at 6. He's been practicing his presentation all week." Lyric smiled. No matter how successful she became, nothing trumped being Dorian's mother. She cleared her evening schedule with 2 quick emails and headed out early. At 8 years old, Dorian Morrison was already showing signs of exceptional intelligence. His 2nd-grade teacher had recommended testing for gifted programs. He read at a 5th-grade level, built complex structures with whatever materials he could find, and asked questions that made adults pause and reconsider their assumptions. Lyric found him in the school gymnasium, standing guard over his science fair project, a working model of sustainable urban water collection systems, complete with rain sensors and filtration demonstration. "Mama." His face lit up when he saw her, that smile that made every sacrifice worth it. "You came early. I wouldn't miss this for anything, she said, crouching to examine his project. Tell me how it works. He launched into an enthusiastic explanation, using terms like condensation cycle and greywater reclamation with the seriousness of a professional engineer. Other parents stopped to listen, impressed by his knowledge and presentation skills. But Lyric noticed what others might miss, how his eyes scanned the crowd of families, lingering on fathers standing beside their children. How he stood a little straighter when she praised him, seeking approval from the only parent he'd ever known. How he never asked about his father anymore, having learned years ago that the questions brought sadness to her eyes. She told him age-appropriate truths. His father lived far away, had made different choices, still cared about him, but couldn't be part of their daily lives. Dorian had accepted this with the resilience children develop when they have no other option. But acceptance wasn't the same as understanding, and understanding wasn't the same as being whole. Do you think I'll win? Dorian asked after his presentation, looking up at her with hope and vulnerability. I think you've already won, Lyric said, pulling him close. You worked hard, learned something new, and created something that could actually help people. That's better than any ribbon. He won second place, which he accepted with grace, already analyzing what he could improve for next year. On the drive home, he chatted about his next project idea, something about solar panels and school buildings, while Lyric listened and marveled at how this brilliant, kind, thoughtful person had come from her darkest moment. Mama, he said suddenly, his voice quieter. Tommy said his dad is teaching him to play basketball this summer. Lyric's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That sounds nice for Tommy. Could you teach me? Her heart broke and swelled simultaneously. Baby, I'm not very good at basketball, but we could learn together. Or maybe Uncle Robert could help. Natasha's husband had been a consistent male presence in Dorian's life, stepping in where Sebastian's absence left gaps. Okay, Dorian said simply, then returned to discussing solar panels. Later that night, after Dorian was asleep, Lyric stood in his doorway watching him. He clutched a stuffed elephant she'd bought him as a baby, his face peaceful in sleep. She'd given him everything she could, stability, education, love, opportunities. But she couldn't give him a father, and some nights that knowledge sat heavy on her chest. Sebastian's downfall began with the same ambition that had taken him to Singapore. After 6 years as creative director at Morrison International, he'd been offered a partnership opportunity, a chance to buy into the firm and become part owner. The catch was a substantial financial investment, $2 million. He'd leveraged everything, his savings, his apartment, loans against future earnings. The partnership would make him set for life, or so the projections showed. Then the global market shifted. The multinational clients that had made Morrison International profitable began cutting marketing budgets. 3 major contracts fell through in rapid succession. The Singapore office, which had been expanding aggressively, suddenly became overextended and unprofitable. Within 18 months, Morrison International Singapore declared bankruptcy. Sebastian lost his partnership investment, his job, and his reputation. The design community was small and interconnected. News of the failure spread quickly. His name became associated with overambition and poor judgment. He moved back to the United States, but not to Chicago. He couldn't face that city, those memories. Instead, he landed in New York, taking freelance work that paid a fraction of his former salary. The expensive clothes stayed in his closet while he wore the same 3 outfits to meetings. His portfolio, once prestigious, now felt dated and disconnected from current trends. At 42, Sebastian found himself starting over, except this time without the hunger and optimism of youth. He was tired, disillusioned, and acutely aware of everything he'd sacrificed for a career that had ultimately failed him. The monthly payments to Lyric continued. He'd never missed one, even when it meant eating ramen and walking instead of taking the subway. It was the only thing from his old life he maintained with perfect consistency. He didn't know if she needed the money anymore, but it felt like the only thread connecting him to Dorian, the only way he could still claim to be contributing something. He never called, never asked to visit. What right did he have? He'd chosen his path, and it had led exactly nowhere meaningful. The magazine was sitting on a table at his favorite coffee shop in Brooklyn, the cheap place where he could nurse a single cup for hours while working on freelance projects. Sebastian almost didn't notice it at first, focused on his laptop screen, until something made him look up. The Fortune magazine cover featured a woman in a sharp navy suit, standing in front of a building with children playing in a courtyard behind her. The headline read, "Lyric Morrison, How One Single Mother's Vision is Revolutionizing Urban Housing and Social Equity." Sebastian's coffee went cold in his hand as he stared at the cover. Lyric looked powerful, confident, radiant, everything she'd been when he met her, amplified by success and purpose. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a sharpness to her gaze that spoke of battles fought and won. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with achievement. He bought the magazine with trembling hands and read the entire feature article standing right there in the coffee shop. It detailed her journey from struggling marketing consultant to billionaire developer. It talked about foundation communities, the awards, and the global impact. It mentioned, in a single paragraph, that she was a single mother raising a gifted 8-year-old son. One line gutted him. When asked about balancing motherhood and career, Morrison laughs. "You don't balance them, you integrate them. My son is my reason. Everything I build is ultimately for him and children like him who deserve better foundations than society typically provides." Her son, not our son, not Dorian's father and I, just her son, raised by her, inspired by her, loved by her alone. Sebastian sat down heavily, the magazine open to a photo of Lyric at a construction site, wearing a hard hat and pointing at blueprints, completely in her element. This was the woman he'd left because he couldn't imagine compromising his career. This was the future he'd walked away from. She'd become everything she was meant to be, not despite him leaving, but perhaps because of it. While he'd chased prestige across the ocean, she'd built something that actually mattered. The announcement appeared in his LinkedIn feed 2 days after he bought the Fortune magazine. Lyric Morrison would be delivering the keynote address at the National Urban Development Conference in Chicago next month. Registration was still open. Sebastian stared at the event page for 20 minutes, his cursor hovering over the registration button. What was he thinking? That he'd show up and what? Congratulate her, apologize, beg for forgiveness? She'd moved on, built an empire, raised their son without him. She didn't need him to appear like a ghost of past failures, but he couldn't stop thinking about it, about seeing her in person after 8 years, about being in the same room while she shared her vision with the world, about the possibility, however remote, of maybe finding a way to tell her he was sorry, that he'd been wrong about everything that mattered. He registered for the conference using money he should have spent on fixing his laptop's cracked screen. He booked a cheap hostel in Chicago, the kind with shared bathrooms and bunk beds, so different from the luxury hotels he'd stayed in during his creative director days. He requested time off from his freelance projects, promising to work double hours before and after to make up for it. His colleagues thought he was crazy. "Why torture yourself watching your ex succeed while you're barely scraping by?" one asked. "Because I need to see what I lost," Sebastian answered honestly. "I need to understand the cost of the choices I made." The month before the conference crawled by. He read everything he could find about foundation communities, watched every interview Lyric had given, studied the success he'd once thought would be his own. She spoke about architecture, the way he used to speak about design, with passion and purpose, and the conviction that creative work could change lives. She'd found what he'd been chasing, meaningful success that didn't require abandoning everything else. She'd proven that you could be brilliant and present, ambitious and loving, successful and whole. Sebastian had chased prestige and lost everything. Lyric had chosen love and gained the world. 3 days before his flight to Chicago, he almost cancelled. What was the point? She wouldn't want to see him. Dorian didn't know him. He was a stranger to the life they'd built, an irrelevant footnote in Lyric's origin story. But the night before his flight, he pulled out the one photo he'd kept from their life together, the two of them at a street fair in Chicago, laughing at something long forgotten, his arm around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him like he was her whole world. That man in the photo had been loved by Lyric Morrison. That man had thrown it all away. Sebastian booked a ride to the airport, packed his single carry-on bag, and tried to prepare himself for seeing the woman he'd left become the woman she was always meant to be, without him. The National Urban Development Conference was held at the Chicago Hilton, the same hotel where Lyric had attended her first professional networking event 9 years ago as a nervous marketing consultant trying to land clients. Now she was the featured keynote speaker, her name on banners outside the building, her face on the conference program in every attendee's hands. Sebastian arrived early, blending into the crowd of architects, developers, and city planners filling the grand ballroom. He chose a seat in the back, partially hidden behind a structural column, where he could see without being easily seen. His conference badge identified him only as Sebastian Torres, independent design consultant, generic enough to be invisible. The room filled quickly, over 800 people gathering to hear Lyric speak. Sebastian recognized some faces from his old life, colleagues who'd moved on to bigger firms, competitors who'd outlasted Morrison International's collapse. He kept his head down, hoping not to be recognized as the failed creative director who'd lost everything. The lights dimmed, and a video began playing on the massive screens flanking the stage. It showed foundation communities from the air, beautiful buildings integrated into urban neighborhoods, children playing in courtyards, families gathering in shared spaces. The camera moved inside, capturing cooking classes in community kitchens, a mother working in a co-working space while her toddler played safely nearby, teenagers receiving tutoring from resident volunteers. Housing is more than shelter, Lyric's voice narrated over the footage. It's the foundation upon which families build their futures. When we design spaces that support rather than isolate, that empower rather than simply contain, we don't just house people, we transform communities. The video ended, and Lyric walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. She wore a charcoal suit that somehow balanced authority with approachability, her hair pulled back in a style that was both professional and effortless. She smiled, waiting for the applause to settle, completely comfortable commanding a room of hundreds. Sebastian's chest tightened. This was the woman he'd left standing in a restaurant 8 years ago, devastated and alone. Now she stood before the industry's elite as their equal, no, as their superior. She'd taken pain and transformed it into purpose. "Thank you," Lyric began, her voice warm but powerful. 8 years ago, I was a single mother living in a one-bedroom apartment, working 16-hour days while my infant son slept, trying to figure out how to provide for him on a consultant's unpredictable income. I couldn't afford the childcare I needed to work more. I couldn't network because I had no one to watch my baby. I was trapped in a cycle that millions of parents know too well. You need money to access the support that would help you make money. She clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of housing costs versus childcare expenses versus average income. The math doesn't work. For too many families, it simply doesn't work. So I asked myself, What if we designed housing that solved this equation? What if architecture itself could break the cycle? For 40 minutes, Lyric held the room completely captivated. She presented data on foundation communities' success rates. 92% of residents still employed after 2 years, 67% having increased their income by at least 30%, 81% reporting improved mental health and community connection. She showed financial models proving the developments were profitable while charging below market rent. She challenged the industry to think differently about urban planning's social responsibility. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to build cities that work for everyone, not just those who can afford luxury apartments, she concluded. The question isn't whether we can do better, it's whether we will. I'm here to tell you that we must, and I'm committed to leading that change. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Sebastian stood with everyone else, clapping until his hands hurt, watching Lyric accept the recognition she'd earned through brilliance and perseverance. She'd done it all without him. Better than if he'd stayed, probably. The realization hit him with crushing force. He hadn't just lost Lyric, he'd lost the chance to be part of something that mattered. After the keynote, attendees flooded the lobby for the networking reception. Sebastian hung back, uncertain of his next move. He'd come to see her speak, and he'd seen it. Maybe he should just leave, catch an early flight back to New York, let this be what it was, closure from a distance. But then he saw her across the lobby, surrounded by admirers and industry leaders, and his feet carried him forward before his brain could intervene. He waited at the edge of the crowd, watching her gracefully handle questions and compliments, until there was a brief gap in the admirers. She turned to reach for a glass of water from a nearby table, and their eyes met. Lyric froze, the water glass halfway to her lips. For 3 full seconds neither of them moved. The noise of the reception faded into background static. Then someone else approached her with a question, breaking the moment. She handed her glass to an assistant and said something Sebastian couldn't hear, then walked deliberately toward him. Her expression was unreadable, not angry, not pleased, just carefully neutral. Sebastian, his name in her mouth after 8 years, felt surreal. "I didn't expect to see you here. I registered last minute," he said, hating how his voice shook slightly. "Your keynote was... the lyrics were incredible. What you've built is... Let's not do this here," she interrupted quietly, glancing at the crowd around them. "Follow me." She led him through the lobby to a quiet alcove near the business center, away from the reception chaos. They stood facing each other for the first time since that restaurant, the same city but completely different people. "How did you even know I was speaking?" Lyric asked, her arms crossed in a posture he recognized as defensive. "Fortune magazine. I saw the cover, read the article. Then the conference announcement appeared in my LinkedIn feed." He paused. "You look well. More than well. You look like success personified. And you look like you've had a rough few years," she said bluntly, her eyes taking in his worn suit, the weight he'd lost, the exhaustion he couldn't hide. "I heard about Morrison International, the bankruptcy. You kept track of me?" "I have a Google alert on your name," she admitted. "For Dorian. In case he ever asks, I wanted to have answers." The mention of their son hung between them like a weight. Sebastian swallowed hard. "How is he?" "He's 8. He's brilliant. He's kind. He asks questions I can't always answer and builds things that make engineers jealous." Lyric's expression softened slightly when talking about Dorian. "He has your eyes, which is both wonderful and terrible. Does he ask about me?" "He used to. Less now." I told him the truth in age-appropriate ways, that you made different choices, that you live far away, that it's complicated. She met his eyes directly. "I never badmouthed you, Sebastian. I didn't have to. Your absence spoke for itself. The words hit like physical blows, made worse because they weren't delivered with anger, just factual assessment. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. You're correct. You don't. But I'm asking anyway. I was wrong, Lyric, about everything. About Singapore, about leaving, about thinking career success was worth losing you and Dorian. I was catastrophically wrong. Lyric studied him for a long moment. What do you want from me, Sebastian? Forgiveness? I forgave you years ago, not for you but for myself, because carrying that anger was exhausting. Reconciliation. That ship sailed when you boarded a plane to Singapore. A relationship with Dorian? That's complicated and would require serious discussion and time. I don't know what I want, he admitted. I just know that seeing what you've become, what you've built from the ashes of what I destroyed. I needed you to know that I saw it. I see you. And I'm so sorry for every choice that led to me not being part of it. Lyric was quiet for a moment, her expression shifting through emotions Sebastian couldn't quite read. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, less personal, more businesslike. I'm expanding foundation communities to 12 new cities over the next 3 years, she said. Each location needs complete branding, everything from signage to digital presence to community identity materials. It's a massive project, and I've been interviewing design firms for months. Nobody's gotten it right yet. They all want to make it look like luxury branding or charity marketing. It needs to be something else entirely. Sebastian's heart started beating faster. Why are you telling me this? Because despite everything, you were always brilliant at visual storytelling. You understood how to make concepts feel accessible and aspirational simultaneously. That's exactly what this project needs. She pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at him. I just sent you the creative brief. If you're interested, submit a proposal by the end of next week. It'll be evaluated alongside submissions from 5 other firms, all bigger and more established than your independent consultancy. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to pitch for a job, Lyric corrected. If your proposal is the best, you'll get the contract. If it's not, you won't. I'm not doing you a favor, Sebastian. I'm giving you an opportunity to prove you can deliver value to my company. There's a difference. He understood what she wasn't saying. This was redemption offered on professional terms only. No personal reconciliation, no easy forgiveness. Just the possibility of contributing to something meaningful if he could prove himself worthy. I'll submit something, he said. Thank you for even considering it. Don't thank me yet. My standards are extremely high, and I have zero tolerance for missed deadlines or subpar work. If you get this contract and fail to deliver, our professional relationship will be over permanently, and that will impact any future possibility of you being in Dorian's life. Do you understand? Completely. Lyric's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression transformed, the professional mask dropping away, replaced by pure maternal warmth. Excuse me one moment, she said, stepping slightly away. Hi, baby, she said into the phone, her voice soft in a way Sebastian remembered from their mornings together. Yes, I'm still at the conference. I know, but Aunt Natasha said you could stay up an extra 30 minutes if you read. Of course your robotics project counts as reading the instructions. Okay, I'll be home by 9. I love you more than the whole sky. She hung up, and for just a second before the professional mask returned, Sebastian saw the woman he'd loved. Tired from balancing everything but radiantly happy in a way she'd never been with him. Being Dorian's mother had completed something in her that loving Sebastian never had. That was Dorian, he asked unnecessarily. Yes, he's with Natasha tonight. There's a robotics competition at his school this weekend that he's been preparing for obsessively. She hesitated, then made a decision. If you're still in Chicago on Saturday, you could come. As an observer, nothing more. He wouldn't know who you are, and I'm not introducing you as his father. But if you want to see him in person, from a distance, you could. Sebastian felt tears threatening for the first time in years. I would like that very much. Hawthorne Elementary School, Saturday at 10 a.m. Stay in the back, don't approach us, don't make a scene. I'm serious, Sebastian. You're there as my guest observing the competition, nothing more. I understand. I'll be invisible. Someone from the conference called Lyric's name. A city official wanting to discuss bringing foundation communities to Atlanta. She acknowledged them with a wave, then turned back to Sebastian. I need to go. I have 7 more meetings tonight and a flight to Boston in the morning. She paused, studying him one more time. Send me your proposal, make it good. And Sebastian, this opportunity I'm offering, it's more than you deserve, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because my projects deserve the best possible creative work, and if that happens to be you, then my personal feelings are irrelevant. I won't let you down. You already did years ago. This is your chance to not do it again. She softened slightly. For what it's worth, I do hope you find your way back to something meaningful. I don't hate you, Sebastian. I just learned to build a life that doesn't include you, and I'm not willing to risk what I've built on the possibility that you've changed. She walked away then, back into the crowd of admirers and opportunities, leaving Sebastian standing alone in the alcove. He watched her command the room, saw industry leaders seeking her opinion, noticed how she balanced graciousness with boundaries. This was what he'd lost. Not just Lyric the girlfriend, but Lyric the partner, the mother, the visionary. He'd left her thinking she was the obstacle to his success, when she'd actually been the foundation he should have built upon. Saturday morning, Sebastian arrived at Hawthorne Elementary at 9:45 a.m., early enough to find a spot in the back of the gymnasium. The space was filled with student projects, robots made from kits, programmed to complete various tasks. Parents clustered around their children, helping with last-minute adjustments. Then he saw them. Lyric in jeans and a casual sweater, looking younger and more relaxed than at the conference. And beside her, working intently on a small robot, was Dorian. Sebastian's breath caught. The photos hadn't prepared him for seeing his son in person. Dorian had Sebastian's features, the same bone structure, the same serious expression when concentrating. But his mannerisms were pure Lyric, the way he tilted his head when thinking, the quick smile when something worked correctly, the animated hand gestures when explaining something. He watched as Dorian demonstrated his robot for Lyric, showing how he'd programmed it to navigate an obstacle course while collecting objects. Lyric listened with complete attention, asking questions that made Dorian think deeper about his design choices. "That's the Morrison kid," someone nearby said. "Mother's the billionaire developer. Kid's supposed to be some kind of genius. Looks like she's raising him right," another voice responded. "No nanny, no entourage, just her and the kid, same as everyone else here." Sebastian stayed for 2 hours, watching Dorian compete, watching Lyric support him with a perfect balance of encouragement and letting him handle challenges independently. When Dorian's robot successfully completed the obstacle course, placing 3rd overall, Lyric's proud smile was brighter than any award Sebastian had ever won. As families began leaving, Lyric's eyes found him across the gymnasium. She gave him a small nod. Acknowledgement that he'd kept his word, stayed in the background, respected her boundaries. Sebastian nodded back, then left before they did. He'd seen what he needed to see. Dorian was loved, supported and thriving. Lyric had given him everything a child needed, filling both parental roles with grace. Walking back to his hostel through Chicago streets filled with Saturday shoppers and tourists, Sebastian felt the full weight of his choices. He chased success across the ocean and found failure. Lyric had chosen love and found both success and fulfillment. He had 1 week to create a proposal good enough to earn a place, however small, in the world they'd built without him. It wasn't redemption. That would take years, maybe a lifetime. But it was a start. 3 weeks after the conference, Sebastian received an email from Lyric's office with a subject line that made his hands shake. Contract award. Foundation Communities Branding Project. His proposal had won. Against 5 established firms with decades of experience and massive portfolios, his vision for Foundation Communities' visual identity had been selected. The email was professional, clinical even, outlining contract terms and project timelines. But at the bottom, below the legal department's signature, was a single line in a different font. Good work. This is what I knew you could do when you tried. The contract was substantial, enough to stabilize his finances for the next year. More importantly, it gave him a legitimate reason to be in Chicago regularly for client meetings. Lyric had structured the project in phases, each requiring in-person presentations and approvals. She was being careful, he realized, keeping their interactions professional and scheduled, maintaining boundaries while allowing proximity. 2 months into the project, during a Tuesday afternoon design review at Lyric's office, his phone buzzed with a text from her personal number, not the business line they typically used. Dorian has a regional robotics competition this Saturday in Oak Park. Same rules as before. Observe only, no contact. But if you're interested, I'll add you to the guest list. Sebastian was on a plane from New York before he could overthink it. The Oak Park Community Center was larger than Dorian's school gymnasium, filled with teams from across Illinois. Sebastian found his designated spot in the spectator section, far enough to respect Lyric's boundaries, but close enough to see clearly. Dorian had grown even in the 2 months since Sebastian first saw him. He stood with a team of 4 other kids, all wearing matching blue t-shirts that read Hawthorne Innovators. While the other children fidgeted and joked around, Dorian studied their robot with intense concentration, making tiny adjustments to its programming. Lyric sat in the parent section with Natasha, both wearing the team's blue color. Lyric looked completely comfortable in this world of parent volunteers and elementary school competitions, cheering and encouraging with the ease of someone who'd attended countless events like this. Welcome, everyone, to the Northern Illinois Regional Robotics Challenge, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Today, our young engineers will compete in 3 challenges: navigation, object manipulation, and creative problem solving. Let's give all our teams a round of applause. Sebastian watched as Dorian stepped forward with his team for the first challenge. The navigation course required robots to move through a complex maze, avoiding obstacles while staying within boundary lines. Other teams went first, their robots bumping into walls or veering off course while parents shouted encouragement. When Hawthorne Innovators' turn came, Dorian carefully placed their robot at the starting line. He'd clearly been designated the programmer. The other kids deferred to his judgment about calibration and timing. "Ready?" the judge asked. Dorian nodded, his face serious with concentration. He pressed the start button, and the robot moved forward with remarkable precision. It navigated the maze flawlessly, adjusting for obstacles with smooth, sensor-guided movements. The crowd applauded as it crossed the finish line with the fastest time so far. Sebastian found himself on his feet, clapping harder than anyone, pride surging through him with startling intensity. That was his son. Brilliant, focused, exceptional. He'd had nothing to do with developing those qualities, but they existed in Dorian nonetheless, some combination of genetics and Lyric's devoted parenting. The second challenge involved manipulating objects. The robots needed to pick up blocks and sort them by color into designated zones. This was where several teams struggled, their robots either too rough, sending blocks flying, or too weak, unable to grasp at all. Dorian's team huddled before their turn, clearly strategizing. Sebastian watched his son explain something to his teammates, his hands moving in animated gestures. Whatever he said made the other kids nod in agreement. Their robot approached the challenge methodically. It identified blocks by color using sensors, then carefully gripped and transported them to correct zones. The process was slower than some competitors, but the accuracy was perfect. Every block ended up exactly where it should be. "That Morrison kid is something else," a parent near Sebastian commented to her husband. "Emma's been on his team all year. She says he programs during recess while other kids play." "Is that healthy?" the husband asked. "Kids should be outside playing." "His mom makes sure he does both," the wife replied. "Emma says he plays basketball with them at lunch, then programs after. He's just different." Brilliant difference. Sebastian felt a complicated mix of pride and regret. He'd missed 8 years of this, Dorian's development from infant to this remarkable child. He'd never seen the first steps, never heard the first words, never been present for a single milestone. Meanwhile, Lyric had been there for everything, shaping this young person through daily choices and sacrifices Sebastian couldn't begin to comprehend. During the break between challenges, he watched Lyric approach Dorian's team with juice boxes and encouragement. She crouched to Dorian's level, listening seriously as he explained some technical concern about their robot's performance. She asked questions that made him think through the problem himself, rather than solving it for him, teaching even in these small moments. The final challenge was creative problem-solving. Teams received a surprise scenario and had 30 minutes to adapt their robots to address it. This year's challenge was disaster response. Robots needed to navigate through rubble, an obstacle course, locate survivors, weighted objects with heat signatures, and transport them to a safe zone. Teams scattered to their prep areas, frantically reprogramming and adjusting. Sebastian could see Dorian taking the lead on his team, fingers flying across a laptop while explaining his logic to teammates. The other children contributed ideas. One suggested a mechanical modification, another pointed out a potential navigation issue. But Dorian synthesized everything into a coherent strategy. When their turn came, Sebastian held his breath. The adapted robot moved cautiously through the rubble course, its sensors scanning for heat signatures. It located the first survivor object and carefully secured it, then navigated to the safe zone. Back through the course for the second survivor, adjusting its path based on new obstacles. The time limit was 5 minutes. Dorian's robot completed the full challenge in 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the fastest successful run of the day. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Dorian's team jumped up and down, hugging each other with the unself-conscious joy of children who'd worked hard and succeeded. Lyric was on her feet in the parent section, cheering with tears in her eyes. She'd probably attended 100 events like this, but her pride in Dorian never diminished. After the awards ceremony, Hawthorne Innovators took second place overall. Dorian accepted the trophy with a speech thanking his team and his mother. Families mingled in the community center lobby. Sebastian knew he should leave, respecting the boundaries Lyric had established, but something kept him rooted in place, watching from a distance as Dorian showed Lyric his trophy with obvious pride. Then fate or chance intervened. Dorian's laptop bag fell from the team table, spilling its contents across the floor. The boy crouched to gather his things, crawling partly under the table to reach a flash drive that had rolled far beneath. Sebastian moved without thinking, kneeling beside the table to help retrieve items. His hand and Dorian's reached for the same notebook at the same moment. "Thanks," Dorian said, looking up at Sebastian with those eyes that mirrored his own. "I always pack too much stuff." "That's smart, though," Sebastian replied, his voice catching slightly. Being prepared for anything. Dorian stood, clutching his recovered items, studying Sebastian with undisguised curiosity. Are you a robotics coach? I haven't seen you at our school. No, I'm just interested in robotics. Your team did amazing work today. That creative problem-solving adaptation was brilliant. The boy's face lit up the way children do when adults engage seriously with their interests. We almost didn't finish in time. I had to simplify the pathfinding algorithm, which meant less optimization, but it was more important to complete the task than to do it perfectly. That's sophisticated thinking, Sebastian said, genuinely impressed. Knowing when perfect is the enemy of good enough. My mom says that all the time, Dorian replied. She says in business, you have to know when to ship the product versus when to keep improving it. I think it applies to robotics too. Before Sebastian could respond, Lyric appeared at Dorian's side, her expression carefully neutral. There you are. Aunt Natasha's bringing the car around. Her eyes met Sebastian's briefly, a silent question in them. Mom, this is... Dorian paused, realizing he didn't know Sebastian's name. Sebastian, he supplied. Sebastian Torres. I'm a design consultant working with your mother's company. Recognition didn't flicker in Dorian's face. Why would it? He'd never been told his father's first name, or if he had, it meant nothing without context. Cool. Are you designing stuff for foundation communities? I am. The branding for new locations. That's really important work, Dorian said with the seriousness of someone who'd grown up understanding his mother's mission. Mom says good design helps people understand that foundation communities are for everyone, not just poor people. She says stigma is one of the biggest obstacles to helping families. Your mother is absolutely right, Sebastian said, marveling at the depth of conversation this 8-year-old could hold. And it sounds like you understand her work really well. I go to site visits sometimes, Dorian explained. I've seen 3 different foundation communities buildings. My favorite is the one in the Austin neighborhood. They have a rooftop garden where residents grow vegetables. I helped plant tomatoes last summer. Lyric's hand rested on Dorian's shoulder, gently steering him toward the exit. We should go, baby. You promised Aunt Natasha you'd help make dinner. Okay. Dorian looked back at Sebastian. It was nice meeting you, Mr. Torres. Thanks for helping with my stuff. It was nice meeting you too, Dorian. Congratulations again on your competition. As they walked away, Sebastian heard Dorian ask Lyric, Is Mr. Torres nice? He seems nice. Lyric's response was too quiet to hear, but she glanced back once before disappearing into the parking lot. Her expression was complicated. Not angry, but cautious, protective, evaluating. The following Tuesday, Lyric requested an in-person meeting at her office to review Sebastian's latest design concepts. When he arrived, she was professional but less distant than usual. The robotics competition, she said after they'd finished discussing work. You handled that appropriately. Thank you. He's remarkable, Lyric. I know I have no right to feel proud since I contributed nothing to who he's become, but I am. Watching him problem-solve, lead his team, articulate complex ideas. That's all you. You raised an exceptional human being. He asks about you now, she said quietly. After Saturday, he wanted to know why a work consultant was at his competition. I told him you were interested in robotics and happened to be in town. He accepted that, but he's observant. Eventually, he'll ask better questions. What will you tell him? The truth, age-appropriately delivered. That you're his biological father, that you made different choices when he was born, that it's complicated. She looked directly at Sebastian. But I won't tell him any of that until I'm convinced you're committed to being consistently present. I will not let him form an attachment to you only to have you disappear when it gets hard or when a better opportunity comes along. I understand, What do I need to do to prove I've changed? Show up, consistently, not grand gestures, just steady, reliable presence. The branding project gives you legitimate reasons to be in Chicago monthly. If you make every meeting, deliver quality work on time, and respect the boundaries I set, we can slowly expand your proximity to Dorian. Maybe another competition in a few months. Maybe a Foundation Communities site visit where you happen to be present. Small steps. I'll take whatever steps you're willing to allow. This isn't for you, Sebastian. This is for Dorian. He deserves the chance to know his father if his father proves worthy of being known. But the moment you prove unreliable, we're done. Professionally and personally. Are we clear? Completely clear. Over the next 3 months, Sebastian kept every commitment. He delivered design work ahead of schedule. He attended 2 more of Dorian's events as an anonymous observer. He flew to Chicago even when video meetings would have sufficed. He was building a track record, proving through consistent action that he'd changed. Dorian began recognizing him at events, waving when their eyes met, occasionally approaching to discuss whatever project he was working on. The boy had no idea he was talking to his father, just a friendly adult who understood coding and design and seemed genuinely interested in his work. He likes you, Lyric observed, after a school science fair where Dorian had spent 20 minutes explaining his solar panel experiment to Sebastian. He doesn't warm up to adults easily, but he keeps seeking you out. He's easy to like, Sebastian replied. He's curious, kind, and passionate about learning. I could listen to him talk about his projects for hours. You're doing well, Lyric admitted. Better than I expected, honestly. You've shown up for 3 months straight without missing a commitment. That's progress. It's the bare minimum of what I should have been doing for 8 years. Yes, it is. But it's still progressing. What do you think about second chances? Does Sebastian deserve the opportunity to build a relationship with Dorian after 8 years of absence? Can people truly change, or are some choices unforgivable? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you all stand on redemption and parenting, and whether good intentions matter when the harm has already been done. By month 6 of the branding project, Sebastian had become a familiar presence in Lyric's offices. The initial contract had expanded. His Foundation Communities visual identity system was so successful that she'd hired him for additional projects. Wayfinding design for new buildings, marketing materials for resident programs, a complete digital platform redesign. But more than the professional work, Sebastian was proving himself in smaller, harder ways. He attended Dorian's school basketball games on cold Wednesday evenings, sitting in bleachers with other parents, cheering for a child who still didn't know their connection. He volunteered at a Foundation Communities site visit day, helping residents paint a community mural, working alongside families his designs served. He showed up for every scheduled meeting, every review session, every opportunity Lyric provided, never asking for more, never pushing boundaries. You've been consistent, Lyric acknowledged during a design review in late autumn. I didn't think you had that in you. I didn't either, Sebastian admitted. Singapore taught me I could chase success. Losing everything taught me what success actually costs. But watching you with Dorian, that's teaching me what I should have been building all along. The work itself had changed him too. Designing for Foundation Communities wasn't about prestige or awards. It was about creating visual systems that made single mothers feel welcomed instead of stigmatized, that helped children see their housing as a source of pride rather than shame, that communicated dignity to communities society often overlooked. One afternoon, Sebastian sat in on a focus group with Foundation Communities residents, mostly single mothers like Lyric had been, testing new signage concepts. Their feedback was brutally honest. This font felt condescending, that color scheme looked too institutional. This layout reminded them of welfare offices. We want it to feel like we chose to live here, one mother explained. her toddler on her hip. Not like we ended up here because we had no other options. Even if that's true, the designer shouldn't announce it. Sebastian redesigned everything based on their input, incorporating their suggestions until the residents themselves said it felt right. When the final signage was installed, that same mother sent Lyric a photo of her daughter pointing proudly at their building's entrance. "This is what good design does," Lyric told Sebastian, showing him the photo. "It changes how people see themselves and their place in the world. You're finally using your talent for something that matters." In month 7, Lyric made an unexpected offer during a contract renewal discussion. "The branding work is essentially complete," she said. "We could continue with project-based contracts, or I have another option. I'm expanding my in-house creative team, establishing a full design department instead of outsourcing. I'm offering you a position as Senior Design Director." Sebastian processed this carefully. "Working directly for Morrison Development Group? As your employee?" "Yes. Salary would be comparable to what you're making on contracts, but more stable. Benefits, retirement matching, the standard corporate package. You'd lead a team of 3 designers, report directly to me, and oversee all visual communications for the company." She paused. "It would also require relocating to Chicago full-time." "Is this about Dorian?" he asked. "Because if you're offering out of some sense of—" "This is about my business needs," Lyric interrupted firmly. "You've proven yourself professionally capable and reliable. Your work has directly contributed to increased resident applications and improved community perception. I need someone leading design who understands our mission deeply, and you've demonstrated that understanding. Dorian is a separate consideration, but he is a consideration. Of course he is. Having you in Chicago consistently would make a gradual introduction more feasible. But Sebastian, I need to be clear. This job offer isn't contingent on a relationship with Dorian, and a relationship with Dorian isn't contingent on this job. They're parallel tracks, not connected ones. You could take this position, and I still might decide you're not ready to be introduced as his father. Or you could decline the position, and I might still allow more contact. Do you understand the distinction? You're offering me professional redemption, but personal redemption still has to be earned separately." "Exactly." Sebastian accepted the position. He gave notice to his freelance clients, sublet his Brooklyn apartment, and moved back to Chicago in early December. Not to his old neighborhood with its memories of Lyric, but to a modest one-bedroom in a different part of the city. Starting over, but this time building something sustainable rather than chasing something shiny. His first day at Morrison Development Group, he arrived to find his office was the smallest on the executive floor, fitting, since he was the newest hire and least experienced in development. His team of 3 designers were all younger, skeptical of this 40-something guy who'd apparently failed spectacularly in Singapore before landing here. "I know what you're thinking," Sebastian said at their first team meeting. "You're wondering why Lyric hired someone whose last major venture ended in bankruptcy. Fair question. The answer is that I learned more from failure than I ever learned from success, and I'm here to make sure the work we do actually serves the communities we're designing for, not our egos." His team warmed up slowly, won over by his willingness to take feedback, his insistence on resident input, and his habit of crediting their ideas in presentations to leadership. Within 3 months, they were functioning as a cohesive unit, producing work that consistently exceeded Lyric's high standards. The conversation happened on a Saturday in March, nearly a year after Sebastian had first seen Dorian at the school robotics competition. Lyric had finally decided it was time, inviting Sebastian to her home, neutral territory where Dorian felt safe, for what she described as an important discussion. Sebastian arrived at the address Lyric had provided, a beautiful brownstone in a family-friendly neighborhood. Nothing ostentatious despite her wealth, just a solid home with a small yard where a basketball hoop stood waiting for spring weather. Lyric answered the door, her expression serious but not unkind. He knows something important is happening. I told him we needed to talk about his family history. He's nervous but curious. I'm terrified, Sebastian admitted. Good. You should be. What we say today will shape his understanding of his origins for the rest of his life. She led him to the living room where Dorian sat on the couch, a picture book in his lap that he clearly wasn't reading. "Hi, Mr. Torres," Dorian said, his voice smaller than usual. "Hi, Dorian. Your mom said we need to have an important conversation." Lyric sat beside Dorian, her presence a clear comfort. "Baby, remember how you've asked me before about your dad? Why do some kids have dads who live with them and you don't? Mr. Torres is your biological father," Lyric said gently. "He's the person who, along with me, brought you into the world. But he made some difficult choices when you were born that meant he lived far away and wasn't part of our daily life." The room fell silent. Dorian stared at Sebastian with an expression too complex for a 9-year-old. Confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been hurt or might have been simple processing. "You're my dad?" Dorian's voice was barely audible. "Yes," Sebastian said, his throat tight. "I am, and I made the biggest mistake of my life by not being here with you from the beginning. Why weren't you here?" The question was so simple, so direct. Sebastian glanced at Lyric, who nodded slightly. This was his to answer. "I thought my career was more important than being your father," Sebastian said honestly. "I got offered a job in another country, and I chose that job instead of staying with your mom and waiting to meet you. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things, but that was the worst one." Dorian absorbed this, his 9-year-old brain working to make sense of adult failures. "But you're here now. Why now and not before?" "Because it took me a long time to understand what I'd lost, and because your mum is very protective of you, which is exactly right. And she needed to make sure I was serious about being part of your life before she let me meet you as your father." "Have you been at my competitions?" Dorian asked suddenly. "Mum always said there was a work friend who liked robotics, but that was you, wasn't it?" "Yes," Lyric confirmed. "For the past year, Sebastian has been coming to your events, getting to know you gradually, while I made sure he was someone safe and consistent enough to be in your life." Dorian looked at Sebastian with those eyes that mirrored his own. Accusatory but not hateful, just seeking truth. "Are you going to leave again? When is your job somewhere else?" The question broke Sebastian's heart. "No. I live here now, in Chicago. I work for your mom's company. I'm not going anywhere, but you did before. You left Mom when she was pregnant with me. Why should I believe you won't leave again?" Lyric revealing her new relationship. "That's a fair question," Lyric interjected. "And Dorian, the truth is, we can't know for certain. People can change, but they can also disappoint us again. That's why I wanted you to meet Sebastian slowly, so you could decide for yourself if you want him in your life." "What if I don't want him?" Dorian asked, his voice catching slightly. "Then he respects that decision," Lyric said firmly, looking at Sebastian. "This isn't about what Sebastian wants or what I think is best. It's about what feels right to you. You get to choose how much or how little relationship you have with him." Sebastian nodded, barely trusting himself to speak. "Your mom is right. I know I haven't earned anything from you, Dorian. If you need time, or if you decide you don't want me around, I'll respect that. I'll still be proud of you, and I'll still wish I could have been the father you deserved from the beginning." The 9-year-old sat quietly for a long moment. "Then, can I think about it?" "Of course," Lyric said, hugging him close. "Take all the time you need." Dorian nodded, then looked at Sebastian one more time. "Did you really think your job was more important than me?" "At the time, yes. I thought career success was what mattered most. I was wrong. You matter more than any job could ever matter. I just figured that out way too late. After Sebastian left, the conversation having lasted only 30 minutes but feeling like hours. He sat in his car outside Lyric's brownstone and cried. Not the quiet tears of regret, but deep, wrenching sobs for the 9 years he'd missed, for the pain in Dorian's voice, for the second chance he might not deserve. 2 weeks later, Lyric called him into her office. "Dorian has been asking questions," she said, "about you, about what happened between us, about whether I'm still angry. What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I was angry for a long time, but I've moved past it, that I've built a good life for us and we're happy. And that," she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully, "there's someone else in our life now who's been consistently present." Sebastian's stomach dropped. "You're seeing someone. I have been for 9 months. Julian teaches at Northwestern, urban planning. We met at a conference last year. He's kind, stable and present. Dorian likes him." The jealousy was immediate and irrational, and Sebastian hated himself for feeling it. He had no right. That's good. You deserve someone who shows up. I'm telling you, because Dorian might mention him. Julian knows about you, knows I've been facilitating this gradual introduction. He's been supportive even though it's complicated for him too. Sebastian's genuine growth and acceptance. "How serious is it?" Sebastian asked, then immediately regretted the question. "Sorry, that's not my business. It's serious enough that he's met my family, that he attends Dorian's events with me, that we're talking about future plans." Lyrics were gentle but firm. "Sebastian, I care about you as Dorian's father and as a valued employee, but romantically, that door closed 9 years ago. You understand that, right?" "I do," he said, and meant it. The pain was real, but so was his acceptance. "I'm not here to win you back, Lyric. I'm here to try to be Dorian's father, if he'll let me. Your personal life is yours, and I'm genuinely glad you found someone who treats you the way you deserve." "That means a lot," she said quietly. "And for what it's worth, you've changed. The Sebastian I knew in Singapore would never have accepted this conversation with this much grace. Sebastian from Singapore was an idiot who didn't understand what mattered. Over the following months, Sebastian settled into his new reality. He was Dorian's biological father, working to build trust with a child who had every reason to be cautious. He was Lyric's employee and co-parent, navigating professional and personal boundaries with care. He was the outsider in a family that had learned to function beautifully without him. But he was present, consistently, reliably present, and slowly, painfully, he was learning that redemption wasn't about grand gestures or perfect outcomes. It was about showing up, day after day, and doing the work even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. The Morrison Development Group 10th Anniversary Gala was held at the Chicago Art Institute on a crisp October evening. The grand hall glowed with elegant lighting, filled with over 500 guests, investors, city officials, foundation communities residents, and the architects and designers who'd helped bring Lyric's vision to life over the past decade. Sebastian stood near the back of the room in a rented tuxedo, watching the celebration of everything Lyric had built. 10 years since she'd won the Stockholm competition with her last $50. 10 foundation communities projects had grown to 43 across 15 cities, housing over 8,000 families. Her company now employed 600 people. She'd been featured in Time magazine, spoken at the United Nations, and been offered cabinet positions by 2 different presidential administrations, all of which she declined to focus on her mission. "You look nervous," a voice said beside him. Julian Hayes stood with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to Sebastian. He was exactly as Lyric had described, steady, kind, with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. An academic who'd found his way into Lyric's world through shared passion for urban development. "Thanks," Sebastian said, accepting the glass. You didn't have to. I know, but we should probably talk at some point like actual adults instead of awkwardly avoiding each other at Dorian's events. Julian smiled without hostility. The lyrics speak highly of your work, and Dorian clearly values having you in his life now. That matters to me because they matter to me. Sebastian studied the man who'd been present for Lyric in ways he never had. You're good for her, for them both. I appreciate how you've handled this situation. It hasn't been easy, Julian admitted honestly. Watching my partner facilitate a relationship between her son and the man who broke her heart, that required some serious conversations and trust. But Lyric was right. Dorian deserved the chance to know his father, and you've proven yourself worthy of that chance. I'm trying. You're succeeding. That kid talks about your design sessions together constantly. Last week he told his class his dad works for his mom's company, creating visual systems for social good. First time I've heard him call you Dad without hesitation. Julian paused. That's growth, for both of you. Before Sebastian could respond, the lights dimmed and Lyric took the stage. She wore a deep emerald gown that somehow balanced elegance with approachability, her hair swept up, confidence radiating from every gesture. At 42, she'd grown into the kind of beauty that came from purpose rather than youth. Beside her stood Dorian, now 14 years old, in his first real suit, looking uncomfortable but proud. He'd insisted on being part of tonight's program, despite his general preference for robotics labs over social events. Thank you all for being here tonight, Lyric began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. 10 years ago, I was a single mother working from a cramped apartment, designing housing concepts on my kitchen table while my infant son slept. I entered a competition I could barely afford, proposing an idea that most people thought was naive at best, impossible at worst. The audience laughed gently, many of them remembering the early skepticism foundation communities had faced. I called the concept foundation communities because I believe that housing should provide more than shelter. It should provide the foundation upon which families could build better futures. But tonight, I want to talk about a different kind of foundation, the personal kind that we all need to build our lives upon. She paused, her eyes finding Sebastian in the crowd for just a moment before moving on. 14 years ago, my life fell apart. A relationship ended, my plans crumbled, and I found myself pregnant and alone, terrified that I couldn't provide for the child I was bringing into the world. I would have told you then that I'd lost my foundation, that everything I'd built was destroyed. Dorian stood quietly beside her, listening to a story he knew but perhaps hearing differently in this public context. But I was wrong. My foundation wasn't that relationship or those plans. My foundation was my determination, my creativity, my refusal to accept that circumstances defined my worth or my son's future. When everything external collapsed, I discovered the foundation that had been inside me all along. The room was completely silent now, everyone captivated by her vulnerability. Foundation Communities exists because I needed it when Dorian was born. Every community kitchen, every childcare center, every co-working space, they're all responses to problems I lived through. I built what I needed, and in doing so, I discovered that thousands of other families needed it too. She gestured to the screens behind her, which began showing photos. Residents cooking together, children in on-site daycare, mothers working while their kids played safely nearby, families thriving in spaces designed to support rather than simply house them. These 43 communities represent more than architecture or social programs. They represent the idea that we can build systems that acknowledge how life actually works for real. Families, not how we wish it worked. That single parents aren't broken families needing charity. They're complete families needing intelligent support structures. The applause started, but Lyric raised her hand gently to continue. But here's what I've learned over this decade of building. Foundations aren't static. They grow and shift. People who once seemed essential to your structure can leave, and you discover you're still standing. People who seemed irrelevant can become essential supporters. The foundation you think you're building might actually be preparation for something entirely different than you imagined. She looked at Dorian, then at Julian in the front row, then briefly at Sebastian. My son is my foundation. Not in the sense that I built my life on him, that would be unfair pressure for any child, but in the sense that loving him taught me what actually matters. Every decision I've made, every project I've pursued, every risk I've taken has been filtered through one question: what kind of world am I building for him? After the formal program ended and guests mingled over dessert and cocktails, Sebastian found himself on the Art Institute's rooftop terrace, needing air and perspective. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, lights reflecting off Lake Michigan in the distance. Hiding or reflecting? Lyric's voice came from behind him. Sebastian turned to find her alone, having slipped away from the celebration. Both, I think. Your speech was powerful. It was honest. She joined him at the railing, looking out at the city. I've spent 10 years building this company, but tonight felt like the moment to acknowledge publicly what it all really means. When you talked about foundations shifting, about people leaving, and discovering you're still standing. Sebastian paused. I heard what you didn't say directly. I was the person who left. Julian is the person who became essential. Yes, Lyric said simply. But Sebastian, that's not a condemnation. It's just the truth. You leaving destroyed the foundation I thought I had, but it forced me to build a better one. Would I have created foundation communities if we'd stayed together? Maybe, but probably not. I needed that desperation, that fire of having to provide for Dorian alone, to push me beyond what I thought possible. So me abandoning you was actually helpful? The bitterness in his voice surprised him. Don't do that, Lyric said sharply. Don't turn your abandonment into some noble sacrifice that served me. You left because you wanted career success more than you wanted us. That choice hurt me deeply and deprived Dorian of a father for 9 years. Own that without trying to make it meaningful. Sebastian absorbed the rebuke, recognizing its fairness. You're right. I'm sorry. But, Lyric continued, her voice softening, what happened after you left? The life I built, the person I became, the success I achieved, that's mine. You don't get credit for it, but you also don't have to carry it as additional guilt. I didn't succeed to spite you or prove you wrong. I succeeded because I had no other choice, and discovered I was capable of more than I knew. They stood in silence for a moment, the party noise drifting up from below. Julian is going to propose, Lyric said suddenly. Probably tonight. He's been nervous for weeks, and Dorian helped him pick out the ring. The news settled over Sebastian like a weight, not surprising, but still significant. How do you feel about that? Terrified and excited in equal measure, she admitted. I've been independent for so long, building a life that's just mine and Dorian's. Letting someone else in permanently feels vulnerable in ways that scare me. But you love him. I do. Very much. He's steady and present and kind. He loves Dorian genuinely, not as a package deal with me, but as his own person. He makes me laugh. He supports my work without needing to control it. He's everything I didn't know I needed after you. Then you should say yes, Sebastian said, meaning it. You deserve that happiness. Lyric looked at him directly. Do you mean that, truly? I do. I spent years chasing the wrong things, Lyric. Career prestige, professional recognition, success that looked impressive from the outside. I lost you, I lost Dorian's early years, and I eventually lost the career too. Everything I thought mattered turned out to be hollow. He gestured toward the party below. where Dorian could be seen talking animatedly with a group of Foundation Community's teenagers. But you built something real, something that matters, and you're raising an incredible human being who's kind and brilliant and thoughtful. If Julian gets to be part of that, he's the luckiest man alive. You're part of it too now, Lyric reminded him. Dorian considers you his father. He values your relationship. That won't change if I marry Julian. I know, and I'm grateful for every moment I get with him, even though I know I'm playing catch-up for the rest of his life. Sebastian paused. When you give your toast at your wedding, I hope you tell the truth, that you built your foundation alone, that you didn't need rescuing, that Julian is choosing to join something already strong and complete. Lyric smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. When did you become wise? Failure is an excellent teacher, so is watching you succeed where I failed. Dorian found them on the rooftop 20 minutes later, still talking about logistics and boundaries and the careful dance of co-parenting when one parent was marrying someone new. Mom, they're about to cut the cake, and Mr. Johansson from the foundation board wants you for photos, he announced. Then noticed the emotional atmosphere. Am I interrupting? No, baby, we were just talking, Lyric said, wiping discreetly at her eyes. Dorian looked between them with the perceptiveness of a teenager who'd grown up navigating complex adult dynamics. You told him about Julian, didn't you? How did you? Lyric started. Mom, you've been weird for weeks. Julian has been weird, and you two have been having a lot of important conversations lately. Dorian shrugged. I'm not stupid. Julian is going to propose. You're going to say yes, and everyone's worried about how I'll handle it. And how will you handle it? Sebastian asked carefully. Dorian considered this seriously. Julian is great. He's been around since I was 8, helped me with science projects, taught me about urban planning, never tried to replace you even when you weren't around yet. If Mom wants to marry him, I'm happy for them. That's very mature of you, Lyric said. I'm 14, not 6. I can handle complexity. He looked at Sebastian directly. You're my biological father. Julian is going to be my stepdad. Mom is happy with both of those things being true. Why would I make it complicated? The simple wisdom of it made both adults quiet for a moment. When did you get so wise? Sebastian asked, echoing Lyric's earlier question to him. I learned from Mom, Dorian said simply. She always says that foundations can support multiple structures. Our family is just built differently than traditional ones, but it's still solid. You do design work. Julian teaches me urban planning. Mom builds housing communities. I get to learn from all of you. He paused at the doorway. Also, I saw your proposal for the Foundation Community's Youth Robotics Lab. If you're thinking about pitching that to Mom officially, you should. It's a really good idea, and I'd love to help test the equipment if it gets built. After Dorian left, Sebastian and Lyric looked at each other and laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from being completely outmaneuvered by a teenager. He's smarter than both of us, Sebastian said. He always has been. Lyric agreed. The gala wound down near midnight. Sebastian helped break down displays, carrying equipment with the facilities crew despite his rented tuxedo, preferring useful work to champagne and small talk. He watched Lyric move through the room, thanking guests, hugging residents who'd traveled to attend, always with Dorian or Julian nearby, her chosen family, complete and thriving. This was a success, Sebastian understood now. Not the awards or the magazine covers or the wealth, though those were nice. The real success was the foundation Lyric had built, both literally in the communities that housed thousands of families, and figuratively in the life she'd created for herself and Dorian. Walking to his car later, Sebastian passed one of the gala displays, a timeline of Foundation Community's growth. There was Lyric accepting the Stockholm Award, heavily pregnant with Dorian. Lyric at the groundbreaking of the first Chicago location, a toddler on her hip. Lyric cutting ribbons, speaking at conferences, standing with residents, always moving forward. He wasn't in any of those photos. His contribution to this story was negative space, the absence that had forced Lyric to become stronger, the abandonment that had clarified her purpose, the failure that had proven she didn't need rescuing. But in the most recent photos, from the last 2 years, he appeared occasionally in the background, at a design review, volunteering at a community event, standing with Dorian at a project presentation, not central to the story, but present, finally present. That would have to be enough. Not redemption exactly. Some choices couldn't be redeemed, only learned from, but participation. The chance to contribute to something meaningful and watch his son grow into a remarkable young man. True success, Sebastian had finally learned, wasn't about what you achieved for yourself. It was about what you built that outlasted you, helped others, and made the world marginally better than you found it. Lyric had known that all along. She'd built her foundation in the ashes of their relationship and created something extraordinary. Sebastian was just grateful to finally understand what she'd been building, and to have the chance to add his small contribution to the structure. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that foundations can be rebuilt, that failure can teach wisdom, and that true success is measured not in what we gain for ourselves, but in what we build for others. What foundations are you building in your own life? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Thank you for watching this journey from betrayal to redemption. And remember, it's never too late to start building something that matters.